So we do this C race, and I win it by like, I can't remember if I lapped people or if I almost lapped people, but like it was pretty exhilarating. I smashed it. I mean, I crashed a bunch. I crashed like 10 times in 30 minutes, like 100% just all over the place, yard sale. But I won it, and I was super pumped. And then there were like these, people started showing up for the B and the A race, and they were like, well, yeah, that's cool, but like, could you do the B race or whatever? And I was like, yeah, of course I could do the B race. So I signed up, threw my $5 down, had a drink of water, and lined back up for the 45-minute race. We went, and I punched it with a couple laps to go, and I ended up winning that one too. And it was just like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And of course, like everybody at this point in the A race that's lining up, they're like, yeah, well, you wouldn't be able to do that in the A race, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, hold my beer.
From KOM Cycling and Michigan Midpack Media, welcome to the Dirty Chain Podcast, the podcast that covers the cycling scene from the viewpoint of the Michigan Midpack. I'm your host, Trevor.
And this is Sheldon.
And on this episode, Sheldon and I sit down with three-time national cyclocross champ, Stephen Hyde. Sheldon, it looks like your background has changed a little bit. Are you in a different location?
I am in Lansing. I'm back in our hometown. I'm
in Lansing,
so
all right.
Excited to be able to ride gravel again.
Have you gotten any gravel rides quite yet?
Not here. On Sunday, I actually rode from St. Clair Shores to Fenton, and I managed to get so it was a 64-mile ride, and I got about 20, maybe 25 miles of gravel in that span, and it was almost fantastic, except for the entire ride was into a just block headwind. I averaged like 14.6 miles per hour. I was so dead by the time I got to Fenton. I was just shelled sitting on a bench, and people were staring at me as I sucked down packet after packet of baby food.
Is that where your ride ended in Fenton?
It ended there.
You just went straight into the headwind, straight west, right?
So yeah, and when I hit Fenton, it was going to turn it into a full-on crosswind, but I was so cooked at that point, I just called it there, and I had to call for a ride.
Oh man.
I was cooked. I was like, I overestimated my fitness and underestimated the wind.
Yeah. Sounds like a typical Sheldon ride for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Overestimated fitness, underestimated every other thing.
Typical Sheldon move. Typical bad decision.
So that was still out of St. Clair Shores, but now you're back in Lansing. Hopefully, well, I mean, it doesn't really change much because I probably won't see you out on the road, but you can at least have...
We might have a accidental crossing of paths at some point.
There might be, but at least you have you're in closer proximities to some of the fantastic gravel we have in this area for sure.
I can't wait.
So,
except it's raining this morning.
It is raining this morning. The weather continues to be kind of up and down. We've had some good pockets of weather, and I've been able to get outside. Still doing a little bit of the Zwift thing, trying to do some more of the Zwift racing. But I've been getting
to grit, didn't you?
Yeah. There's another grit. There's another grit stage. So over in Grand Rapids. It started out of Marne, which is kind of north of Grand Rapids there, and boy, this stage this week was one for the books. I tell you what.
I saw there was a Subaru stuck in quite the pit.
So again, like we've talked about this in the past couple episodes, but some of the people over in Grand Rapids have put together this individual time trial series to just get people out on their own to compete against one another on these solo Strava attempts, much like people are doing kind of all over the country. It's a ton of fun. This time around, it's a kind of gravel centric, and so I did it last week, and then this week as well. And there's what, Sheldon, I almost don't want to tell you about this segment. It's a little over a mile long. It took me over 8 minutes to ride it. And some people did much quicker than that, but I almost don't want to tell you. I just want to take you out there and not and just have you experience it. Let's just say there's a lot of mud, there's a lot of water and puddles, and you don't quite know how deep those puddles are. Might be waist deep, might be ankle deep, and you don't know. And this water ain't clear, so you just got to find out.
I bet today anybody that's riding this morning, I bet it, because we got a fresh topping of rain last night. So yeah. I'm sure that. What's the name of the road? I saw you say it on Facebook. Or the segment name.
The segment name is Sahara, like the Sahara Desert, Sahara Yanao. And I don't know if that's the road name. Maybe the road is Sahara, but
is it like, if it was dry, would it be a sand road? Or
it's probably pretty sandy. But there are like legit creek crossings. There's like 2 creek crossings through it. So it's right up your alley, man. I think you would really dig it.
Maybe you have to get out there this weekend.
It was fantastic, and I might try to give it another go before the end of this week, just to, now that I've experienced it. And Matt Acker put up a video of him rolling through it. Actually, we should link to this video on our Facebook page, just because it's amazing. It's so great. So we'll have to do that. But yeah, Grit Series. That was a really fun ride, and I was soaked, man. The next day, I rode outside and my shoes were just still soaked from that. It was great. Sheldon, there is another. I don't know if I'd call it an event, but it is Zwift related. But I'm throwing this out there. I'm wondering if you'd be interested to get your trainer out. My brother sent me a message the other day. He linked to maybe something on Strava, but yeah. it is a Zwift beer challenge.
Oh, I mean, you kind of have my curiosity already.
So, are you familiar with the beer mile?
Yes, I am.
So you're on a track. You drink a beer every single lap of the track. Do you start with a beer?
I think you before you can start the cross line, I think you have to finish the first beer.
Okay.
And like as you finish it, you toss it and start your first lap.
So this is I think this is on Strava, and they have the beer bike challenge, and it's very similar. And it is the first to 20 miles. And so your intervals are 4 miles. And it tells you have to drink a beer within that 4 miles. It has to be over 4.7%. Here's my idea. This is what I want to do. I want to open this up for whoever wants to do this. We got to figure out a Friday night or a Saturday night. Have an open Zoom challenge, and just anyone that wants to try it, and just open up Zoom.
And we will record you slamming beers.
Throwing up. I think it would be... So I think you got to start with a beer within, and you have to finish it within that 4 miles. I don't know all the rules, but we can figure this out. But
so 5 beers, in 20... That is hard.
It's either 4 or 5. I can't figure out the exact...
if you have to drink one before you start.
Oh, say this says that the official rules, if you puke, add 4 miles and 1 beer. Oh. So if you throw up, you have to add time and another beer. If you throw up again, you're disqualified.
I mean, if this was 21-year-old Sheldon, I think I could accomplish this pretty clearly. 35-year-old Sheldon's going,
yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, it might be fun. I don't know. But anyways, it sounds like a terrible decision, so I think we should give it a shot.
So what, tomorrow? I'd have to activate my Zwift.
It's worth it. 100% worth it. So speaking of Zwift, we have a giveaway that our friends at KOM Cycling are partnering with. They make an incredible trainer block for your front wheel. I have one. Sheldon, do you use one of these when you ride the trainer?
When I'm on the trainer, when I do use my trainer, I absolutely have one. I was one of those people for years. I used an old college textbook that wouldn't get bought back, so I had like a $300 tire block. But
this one's cool. It has like different levels, so you're not just locked in with a single distance from the ground. You have a couple different options there. Locks it in well. It's really sturdy.
I'm always on a hardwood floor, and it has little pads on the bottom that keeps it from slipping, which is amazing.
And I know for a fact that talking with Austin from KOM that it's been one of the hottest items since quarantine, since the lockdown, when people are really hitting their trainer hard, and they've kind of sold out of them for a little bit, but I think they're having some more. So they're willing to give us 5 of these trainer blocks. Is that what they call them? Trainer blocks? Yeah.
Yep, trainer wheel blocks.
Trainer wheel blocks to give away. So what we want to do...
We're going to have you call into our hotline. The number is 616-522-2641. We want you to call in, leave a message on how you as a cyclist are coping with quarantine. Are you on Zwift? Are you going out doing solo rides? Are you doing the Grit series out of Grand Rapids? Tell us what you're doing. Leave us a message. Remember, 3 minutes or less, because the phone service does have that 3-minute limit. But we want to hear from you. First 5 that call in are getting a free KOM wheel trainer block.
Yeah, and make sure you tell us your name and all that important information. Don't do the equivalent
of a ding dong ditch, or you don't get a trainer block.
My guess is your chances are pretty darn good at winning one of these trainer blocks. So yeah, thank you KOM for supplying us with these trainer blocks, and we are looking forward to hear how you are dealing with quarantine. So man, maybe last week or a couple weeks ago, we had a fantastic conversation with Stephen Hyde.
I knew he was going to be an interesting interview. I was not expecting what we got.
We're both not like the most experienced or knowledgeable about cyclocross, but I have been a fan of his for a few years, just watching him as he's been winning national championship after national championship, and just seems like a really cool guy. For me personally, he's like really into music, so I kind of dig that whole thing.
It's interesting how he started from literally the most grassroots style of cyclocross you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if
$5 entry fees, and
if you want to hear about Stephen's national championship races, or hear very detailed about his experience in Europe, there's probably other interviews that you could listen to, but what we got was a real
the true building blocks of what made him a national champion.
Yeah, we got to hear his whole story from the beginning, and some really cool stories in there that
crossing the nation without a place to live.
Yeah, for sure. So it was super great experience just to talk with him, and then he told us a little bit about his new coaching service that he is rolling out, and kind of what his career is going to look like, what he thinks it might look like now in the future. So yeah, should we just get right into it?
Yeah, let's hear from here's Stephen.
Hey,
all
Stephen,
right.
How's it going?
Great. How's it going?
Oh, cooped up inside right now.
Yeah, join the club.
You're held up in Massachusetts, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Did your governor do the state and lockdown, kind of like what we've got going on in Michigan right now, or is it more of just a self-imposed? Or
yeah, no, all the businesses are shut down. Just like essential, healthcare and stuff like that is kind of the only thing remaining. A couple of grocery stores. That's about it.
Yeah, that's kind of how it is here.
How are you? Yeah. How are you getting through the time then?
Well, I mean, for me, it's kind of at first I was like, oh God, what am I going to do? Especially because right now it's like, it's April in Massachusetts. So it's, you get a day of sun and then 4 days of just solid rain.
Are you sure you're not talking about Michigan right now? This sounds like Michigan.
Yeah, no, it's just like the northern part of the country is just brutal this time of year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've got plenty going on right now. I mean, I just kind of kicked off a coaching service, and that's been taking some time. And I've got plenty to do.
This is considered off season for you, anyways, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, are you at all training, or just basically taking off season?
Well, so I typically do 2 seasons. I do my cross season, which is my A season, and my B season, which is usually prep. I usually take the rest of February off, and then kind of through the beginning of March, and I start training March, April, May, start to kind of race in like end of May or in June, July, shut it down and kind of kick over. So it's a pretty short season for me, but obviously that didn't happen. So I started to train, and then I pulled the plug. A couple of weeks into it, probably 2 weeks into it, and it was just like, all right, well, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to train for necessarily. I could use some time off. Really, just that kind of period of time that I normally take is like, the kind of the maximum amount I'm allowed before I have to start racing again. And what's really required is a lot more than that. So it was kind of like, all right, cool. This is you couldn't pick a better time. I'm tired. So
well, I bet your coaching schedule is pretty easy. It's like all just base miles.
Yeah, I mean, depending for myself, yeah, it's just mileage for me, and keeping up skills, and it's time to like this time of year it's not as crucial that I get really good, focused, fitness.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's like, okay, when the weather's good, go train well. Go have fun. I don't really like. I'm not just on my road bike or whatever. I'm riding some trails. I'm riding my mountain bike or whatever. Normally at this time. Right now, I'm certainly not getting like wild. I'm not going riding my mountain bike or anything like that. And in fact, I really haven't even been outside a ton lately. I'm riding a little bit, but really just I'm doing some. I just did a hour and a half today on the trainer, and pretty unstructured. For me.
In a normal season for you, do you do much mountain biking, either as just training, or do you even do some mountain bike racing?
Yeah. Actually, I kind of started mountain bike racing back in Northwest Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was kind of a long time away from that. And when I got the opportunity, essentially I decided I didn't want to race on the road anymore full time, or for what I consider full time for me.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of gave me the opportunity to get back on the mountain bike, and with Cannondale's support, it was really cool. So I did a couple of years of just kind of progressive mountain biking, and I've done some of the epic races. I've done a bunch of UCI racing, did a lot in Canada, the Canada Cups. I was fourth 2 years ago at XC Nationals, and just off the podium. And so,
Nice.
it's actually something that I really, really enjoy doing. In fact, I mean, all said, I'm probably a better mountain biker than I am a cyclocross racer. I just love cyclocross racing.
Well, you had mentioned cyclocross being your A season, so is mountain biking your B season? Is that what you were saying, or?
Yeah, I mean, for a minute there was the possibility that I was going to try and go to the Olympics, try to make this Olympic cycle. At the time I was 30 when I was trying, and I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it now. And and honestly, at the time, it was doable. kind of switching focus and starting to do a lot more specificity around that and start to really build, especially off the bike stuff, doing a lot of gym work and whatnot. I really started to build into that, the idea of that, and some results came, and I was starting to check the boxes off. But kind of at the time, it seemed like it was a real long shot for me making the selection. And this is a good, take home point is, a year later, half of the people that I was going up against for the Olympic selection were no longer viable, athletes. So all of a sudden I'm looking back and going like, oh crap, I just needed another year, and I actually might have been able to make selection for it. So, in terms of that, like that was kind of my other A season, for a minute I was really trying to push hard into that too. But, it's really hard to do 2 separate seasons well. You can do, a lot of people can do 2 seasons, but doing 2 well is really difficult.
Yeah.
So I needed to take a step back and use this, non-cross season as my kind of fun building season. I can do some mountain bike racing, which is great because a lot of the racing is pretty grassroots. And so you go and you get to see people and you hang out and you race your bike. It's just as hard as anything else, but a lot lower stakes. And then mix in some road racing. Like last year I went up and did Tour of Beauce, which I haven't done in a long time since I was on the road.
Oh, wow.
And, so you just kind of mix in those things like, okay, do I need a big roadblock? Cool, I'll go do that. And can I get some intensity with the mountain bike? Great, let's go have fun and do that.
Do you, that's, I guess like there's like kind of a diversification of a lot of, I see it in a few riders, and I'm wondering for you personally, do you find that diversification helpful?
Oh, definitely. I mean, all work and no play, it's when you're super focused on one thing year round, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to be super focused on one thing for 6 months out of the year. You need that time. You need that like kind of refreshing time. And there's some that do it completely year round. There's some that just jump right into the Pro Conti level on the road and race and do some classics races or go out and, do stage racing, and then they go right back into cross. So, without a massive level of support, that's really difficult. And so for me, I kind of need to pick, what fits into my bandwidth and how much connection and fun do I actually need to hold me over for, the time where I actually have to really focus, and kind of battle daily to get through those seasons. So, sometimes it's focused effort, and sometimes it's like, it's just, you got to go find what's refreshing.
So you mentioned racing on the road, mountain bike, of course, cyclocross. And I know you do some, or you started with some BMX racing or riding or whatever. Am I correct?
Yeah. So I for a long time I was, I did street, did dirt jumping, stuff like that. And I still do a little bit.
Uh-huh.
It's not, it's very difficult for me to do now. I mean, I went out a couple of weeks ago and just bailed once and like pulled something in my groin. I'm limping around. I came back and my wife's just like, "What did you do?" I'm like, "I'm an idiot. I'm sorry." I admit it. But yeah, that was a really big focus for a long time for me, throughout middle school, high school, and into my kind of early 20s.
So everything kind of has been, while different iterations of it, it's all about the bicycle and riding the bike in different ways. You grew up in Florida, correct?
Yeah, Northwest Florida in Pensacola.
Okay, and that's when you were like getting to know the bike a little bit as you were growing up?
Yeah, totally. I mean, for me, I was from kind of a small farming community, if you will, kind of on the suburban cusp of it. And, that was just how we got around. Like that was our means of freedom and transportation. And we were able to take liberties with that and just kind of take off and do what we wanted. I mean, from a little kid, like we were outdoor kids, my whole neighborhood was. So it was always kind of like, yeah, you have your breakfast and then you come home at night as a kid. And bikes just kind of developed as a piece of that. And then when BMX became kind of part of that, it was an extension of that. And when we got cars, even more so. I mean, probably when I was 14 or 15, started jumping in cars with people and driving to, say, I don't know, like Tallahassee or New Orleans or Atlanta and Birmingham, getting out and meeting other people riding bikes and going to skate parks and living on the road. I mean, we'd probably cram like 6 or 7 people plus bikes into like a Honda Accord for the weekend. As long as I was back by like Sunday night to go to school, it was fine.
And then how does that develop into discovering the mountain bike or racing on the road? How does that kind of develop from there?
Well, it's interesting. Like I always, even before I got into BMX, I would go to the grocery store or whatever with my parents, and I would see the mountain bike magazines. I'd be like, whoa, that's so cool. Like I didn't really, I don't know, I just saw bikes and people doing cool stuff on it. I didn't realize that there were like trails. I didn't realize that there were, such extreme methods of expression through mountain biking or anything like that. But I just thought it was really cool. There was lots of colors. They were all in the woods. I loved that. And so as a kid, I rode, my like cheap mountain bike around a lot. And we would go camping a lot as a kid. And, we were pretty poor. So like, we did free stuff. We did anything as a family that we could do for free. And camping was certainly one of those. And often we would end up kind of in the middle of nowhere. And, I would go, the only elevation in that part of Florida is where all the creeks are. And so a lot of the dirt roads that lead down to the creeks start up on the paved road. And then they kind of go down and they're sandy. So they have water bars. And I would just start over the roads and just rip the whatever 1.5 miles or 2 miles it was as fast as I could and like jump the water bars to get down to the bottom and then start back over, grab some water and like ride my bike back up. I put like a dirt bike helmet on and all sorts of stuff. So, it was like, that was what I kind of saw mountain bikes. I saw dirt bikes and magazines and whatever. And I made whatever I wanted to out of it. Eventually, in high school, I started working in a bike shop and, kind of where I got my first real mountain bike was there was this old Gary Fisher Tasahara in a U-Haul that we kept as storage. And they were tossing it out one day. And this is like my first, month or two there. And I was like, hey, can I have that? It was a total piece of trash, but like, this guy, Chris, that worked there and was like, yeah, you should take it. And here's some cranks. Those things are worn out. And, I learned to like rebuild wheels with it. I took them apart. And that was kind of my apprenticeship was that, there was a guy I rode BMX with that worked at the shop. He was the master mechanic. And he was like, hey, you should come work for me. We were both into the punk scene and you always seen him at shows and he was a doorman. And he kind of took me under his wing there. And they were like, here's this mountain bike, learn to maintain it. And I loved it. I loved maintaining it. I loved like tweaking it in little ways. And they took me out to the trails at the university and, I just had a blast. I immediately was just hooked. And, they took me to a mountain bike race there. And, the boss gave me like $100 bill and was like, look, man, pay your entry. And if you beat Chris, keep the rest. And I was like, okay, I think this is my competitive side coming out. I beat him, but I dropped my water bottle. I like crashed 100 times. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was just super hooked from then on out. And I rode that mountain bike for years. I loved that thing. And, I got more involved with the mountain bike club there and, I got rid of my truck. And so I started commuting. I got a fixed gear bike and I was riding that thing around. And then, so I would kind of ride my mountain bike from downtown Pensacola, the whatever, 15 miles to the trail, ride the trail or, ride to work and then ride to the trail and then meet those guys after work and ride the trail and then ride home, ride to the punk club or whatever. So it was an extension of like, oh man, if I just add more bikes to my life, I can just ride more bikes in different places. This is awesome. And I moved around from shop to shop and I got into road riding. And and at the same time started putting together a lot of like older bikes. Like people would bring bikes in and just be like, I don't want to deal with this thing. And I always kind of saw that as like a fun challenge. And so I'd tear them down, find parts for them, build them back up, and send them off to a friend. And that eventually turned into a little bike shop in my garage, and then a community shop. And so I was doing a little bit of racing, but doing a lot of just community involvement with bikes. And that was just a lot of fun for me. I ended up leaving Pensacola and building up a touring bike and riding across the country to Oregon. Moved there, worked at some shops there, and
wait, hold on.
Wait,
You got to talk a little bit more about this.
Well, it was it was kind of harebrained. Like my partner at the time was also getting into bikes, and she was like, "Well, I want to move to San Francisco," and her sister lived there, and I had a friend there, a good friend there, and I was like, "Well, I guess I want to move to San Francisco too." And he was like, "Oh, well, yeah, you can come too, but we gotta ride our bikes there. Like that's the only way it's gonna happen." And I was like, "Yeah, duh, that's the only thing that makes sense." We sold all of our stuff, got rid of everything. I mean, they sold that mountain bike, sold my road bikes, and just had this one. I had a Surly Big Dummy, one of those big extra cycles, and slapped that thing together, and we headed off to San Francisco. And around Texas, we got the note that her sister was no longer wanting to live in San Francisco, and we no longer had a place to stay when we got there. So, didn't really phase us that much. So we kept going. We stayed at my aunt's house in Houston for a week and just kind of recouped that first leg of the trip. And we're like, well, shit. I guess we don't really have anywhere to go. We don't have jobs. I guess we just extend our trip out a little bit more. Like, what the hell? So a friend of mine was like, "Hey, man, I'm in Portland now." An old BMX friend of mine, and he was like, "I'm in Portland now. You should come through and stay." I was like, "Well, yeah, sure, that makes sense." So we rode up through New Mexico and Utah and Idaho, and kind of made our way into Oregon. Then we're gonna rip down the coast and end up in San Francisco. But man, Oregon was cool. Like Portland was really rad, and my friend was living there in an apartment with no furniture, had taken the door off of his refrigerator to use as dry storage, and had his little sleeping bag roll up in the corner. And so we just kind of moved in with him. We had 3 sleeping bags all spread out in the living room, and lived there for a little bit. And I found this bike shop there, this like used store built out of this huge Quonset hut. Just piles of parts, just loads of parts. And this was like my heaven. I walked in there and I'm like, oh God, like all this old nerdy campy stuff. And I'm just like totally digging into all this esoteric stuff, all this really cool Northwest, like handmade stuff that's just laying around in piles. And I was like, hey, I really need to work here. They're like, yeah, not a chance, man. Everybody in Portland wants to work here, like whatever. Everybody wants to work at a bike shop there. So I kind of showed up and I was like, look, I really just want to work here. Like, what do I got to do? I'll work for free. Like, just let me like organize this stuff because it's a rat's nest, and I can help. Like, I can put together a plan to like maybe, I don't know, have an idea of like something fun to do with some of these bikes and whatever. And the people behind the counter were just like, look, I don't care. We don't own the place. Like, just do whatever you want. And probably 2 days of that, and the owner came in, and he came through and he was like, hey, who the hell are you? And I was like, hey, I'm Stephen. I'm volunteering. And he's like, we don't have volunteers. I was like, I'm your first. We chatted, talked bikes, and he was like, what are you even doing? And I kind of showed him what I was doing, and I was digging through parts, getting rid of the app's actual trash, and putting it in recycling, and building out correct group sets of all of this old, all this old Suntour stuff, all this old campy stuff, early Shimano stuff, and just trying to get it together to match up with bikes that they had on the floor that either I didn't, think were period correct or should be period correct, or just like needed something better than the whatever, 8-speed group was on it. So he was like, hey, do you want a job? Do you want to work? And I got a job there pretty quick. So I ended up staying there and didn't really do a lot of racing, although I had some friends into racing. I only had my touring bike. But through that shop, I started picking up bikes. I had this Bridgestone XO that I still actually currently have. So I had an old early 60s custom Paramount. All these bikes that I just kind of like took parts, put them together, saw how big of a tire I could put on it, and then like fasten bags or something on it, and just did a lot of like overnight bike touring, a lot of like trail riding on road bikes or whatever. I had a Rivendell for a while and took old mountain bikes and put drop bars on them. Just, made fun bikes with them. And it was really cool. And then, and actually I went to my first cyclocross race there. The Alpenrose, Cross Crusade. A friend of mine actually was going on a blind date and was like, "Hey, I need you to wingman for me. Like, I think she's gonna bring a friend, and like, I don't know what to do. I'm really nervous. It's like a friend of mine." And but I was like, "Yeah, whatever, man. I'll ride with you." We went there, and like, so I'm supposed to be hanging out and being a wingman, but like, I'm looking at the circus going on outside, and I'm like, wait a second, like, how come we're not talking about this weird ass thing that's going on around us? Like I just saw a unicycle race start. Like, what the hell's happening? And so I just like, I got this idea that I was like, whoa, I think that's the perfect sport. I still don't understand what it is, but I think it's the perfect sport as far as I can tell. I went, I eventually ended up back in Florida. And I still never did any racing there. I ended up back in Florida, worked at another shop, and some of the guys there that ended up coming through the cycling club and stuff, invited me out. And it turns out that I was pretty strong from doing all the, I had a great base period. I rode across the country for 3 months. That's a great base period. Did all this good, fun, hard riding with all my friends that were racing, and then ended up back in Florida and just had a really good time riding with a group of people that I kind of never probably would have connected with. And I didn't have a car still. So I was riding my big dummy with my either my road bike or my mountain bike, attached via a fork mount to the back. So I would do that and then go ride with them after work and then meet back at the shop and load everything back up on my bike and ride home. And eventually they were just like, "Hey, look, you should come road racing with us." And so I would, jump into whatever car, whoever was going to whatever race, and just go do it. And then eventually I got a mountain bike, and same thing. Like, it was like, all right, let's go road racing on Saturday and mountain bike racing on Sunday. Who's driving? Who can I go with?
How old are you at this point?
21.
Okay.
Yeah, 21, 22. So, I'm working full time. I'm working full time at the shop. I'm doing, I'm in bands. I'm doing stuff like, community clinics at the co-op or out of my house, going to shows, like probably sleeping 4 hours a night, definitely drinking way too much, just being a kid, but also doing all this racing that I'm just, I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go do the group ride in the morning. And I don't know, I'm just murdering myself, but I'm having a lot of fun. And it just, I'm still at the same time, like, I'm going through the categories and having fun and hanging out with these older people that are kind of pushing me and bringing me around. But I'm still like, yeah, but I'm a mechanic. I really want to be a mechanic. I chase that around. I move up to Martha's Vineyard to work during the summers with a guy who's a ex-elite racer who owns a bike shop up there, and he kind of became my first coach and did summers there, and thought, oh, well, this is my opportunity to like race some cyclocross. I'm in New England now, and at least during the summer, and then I kind of have the winters to do anything. I went down to DC for a winter and worked at a bike shop there and did the Mabra and the Max series down there, and bought a couple of giant aluminum frames through the shop and put them together with some campy 10 speed and kind of did my thing. And Loved cyclocross, just loved it. Just couldn't get enough of it. Sold my mountain bike. I had a road bike and I had my cross bikes, and that was it. I would ride all the races or jump in the car with somebody and get to the races. And this guy Pat down there would take me. And actually, when I started racing cyclocross in DC, I didn't have cyclocross bikes, so I would actually use his Cannondale CAD, whatever, like 7. Commuter bike that this guy Pat used. He would ride it to the bike shop on Friday after work, drop it off for me. I would take the rack off of it and the fenders and put some like knobby tires on it that I found in the dumpster, and he would take me to the races on Sunday and Saturday. And then Monday morning, you got to take the rack, put the rack back on it, and wash it, and get it back ready, and had it ready for him to commute on. And so that was like the first, probably 5 or 6 races of that series that I just I rode on this guy's bike. But again, it was just super fun. I just really liked it, and ended up back in New England, and just kind of eventually got on the Jam Fund program. Went back to Oregon for a second to do bike school at UBI. Did some racing out there, had a lot of fun, went down to San Francisco, did some racing, just kind of living out of my car. And eventually just got hooked up with Al Donahue in the Jam Fund, and kind of had the opportunity to try out, and went to a race with them and ended up winning the race. And it was a kind of a quick turnaround from we don't really have a spot to welcome to the team. And then I made I did another summer out on Martha's Vineyard, and then eventually kind of made my move to race road here in East Hampton, and lived, on people's couches and spare rooms, and race some road. Went through that pretty quick. And by the end of that first year, I was kind of racing elite cyclocross, and then eventually got a road contract the next year from Estella's Pro Cycling. So it seems like about 15 minutes worth of time to me when I left high school to ending up here. But there was went down a lot of roads to get here.
So when you started your first cyclocross, was that kind of the unsanctioned local cyclocross scene, or were on the East Coast, was it already pretty organized through USA Cycling?
Yeah, so actually it was an unsanctioned race, and I skipped this part, but it was actually in Florida, in Tallahassee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when I was saying that I'm kind of a magnet for old bikes and people's leftover parts, somebody came into the bike shop one day and was like, "Hey, here's a friend of mine actually passed away, and here's a box of old parts, spokes and old frame building manuals and stuff like that." And then in kind of beside the box was this 58 centimeter Bianchi Reporter Corsa steel frame and fork. And I was just like, is that a touring bike? What the heck is that thing? And I was like, oh my God, no, it's a cyclocross bike. I've never actually seen one of these in person. And he's like, yeah, man, it's yours. You can do whatever. So I built it up with a bunch of random 10-speed parts that I had laying around, and started riding it around. And my friend Cody was just like, hey, what's up? What's going on here? This looks fun. And I was like, yeah, it's cyclocross. I think we just go ride around in a park. It seems stupid. Let's do it. So he's like, yeah, definitely. And so he ordered a rock lobster, a dented rock lobster off eBay, and we kind of just had fun building up these bikes. And then I don't know, just kind of we watched some YouTube videos, and we were like, yeah, that looks doable. And we went to the park and we made this little cyclocross course. I don't even know what we were looking for. We just did it and we had fun. And then next thing you know, our friend Dave is doing it with us, and we're like, all right, this is great. And then he came up and was like, hey, look, there's a race in Tallahassee. We can go stay with my friend and just ride over to do the race. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do it. We drove to Tallahassee a couple hours. We stayed at his friend's house, and we woke up, had some breakfast, and we rode our bikes over there. Probably brought a bottle, a couple of gels with us, and just kind of rolled up, put our $5 down, and signed in. And we did the C race, the 30-minute C race. Both of us did. and I've got like a road crank on there. I think I've got like a 52 on this thing, and like can't be 10 speed. This thing's a beast. So we do this C race, and I win it by like I can't remember if I lapped people or if I almost lapped people, but like it was pretty exhilarating. I smashed it. I mean, I crashed a bunch. I crashed like 10 times in 30 minutes, like 100% just all over the place, yard sale. But I won it, and I was super pumped. And then there were like these, people started showing up for the B and the A race, and they were like, well, yeah, that's cool, but like, could you do the B race or whatever? And I was like, yeah, of course I could do the B race. So I signed up, and the guy's like, yeah, okay, sure, man, whatever. Threw my $5 down, had a drink of water, and lined back up for the 45-minute race. And at this point, Cody was also in it with me. He was just like, yeah, definitely, let's do this. We're going to be tired. But we went, and I punched it with a couple laps to go, and I ended up winning that one too. And it was just like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And of course, like everybody at this point in the A race is lining up, like they're literally lining up as we're finishing. They're like, yeah, well, you wouldn't be able to do that in the A race, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, hold my beer. Like, and I asked the promoter, I'm like, hey, man, look, I'm out of money. Can I just jump in this one? He's like, by all means, I will pay you to do this one. And so I'm like, Cody, good God, just like find me some water. I need a gel. Like, I'm cracking. I think I'm cramping, but I can't say no because I'm an idiot. And I line up. And all these guys are just like, oh, God, this guy. Like, what the hell is he doing? And from the gun, it's like, it's going. I'm already warmed up, and we're rolling. And I decide, you know what, like, fuck it. And I punch it. I attack the group. And everybody's like, God, what is wrong with this guy? Like, why don't he just stop? Eventually, I start to come apart, like absolutely come apart. And I'm like, Cody, dear God, get me a gel or something. And he hands me a bottle of the gel. I down it, but I'm absolutely just obliterated. And guys start passing me, and but then Cody's on the side. He's like, dude, you blew up everybody. There's only like 5 people left. All you got to do is just like finish this thing, and you're gonna like get paid. Like, yeah. So I finished it. I think I got like 5th or 6th or something like that. I don't remember, but I finished in the money, and I got my like $20. And it's interesting. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like crashing all over the place, but I was just so into it. It was just the explosive nature of it. Doing something you're not supposed to be doing on that bike, kind of. It was just super competitive, super intense, and I loved it. And it's funny, years later, I went down to Gainesville, and I walked into this bike shop, and I was hanging out, and I was asking about these stickers they had behind the counter, and they were like, oh, yeah, we'll get you some of those. And this guy kind of popped back, and he was like, hey, were you at the cyclocross race in Tallahassee like 3 years ago? I was like, oh, yeah, that was me. And he's just like, oh, my God. He like went and got this other person and came back. He's like, it's him. It's the guy. And then he's like, dude, they're yours. It's free, man. Just like whatever you want. Like, I can't believe we've talked about you 100 times.
You're infamous, yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool. So that's kind of how I actually got started. It was years later before, a couple of years after that, before 2 or 3 years, until I actually did another cyclocross race. And then when I was in DC, it was sanctioned racing. It was I believe it was USAC and Mabra. So it was really cool. It went from that being my only experience to kind of jumping in and trying to take it a little bit more seriously. And it was fun to learn on the fly of like, oh, this is what like racing organizations do. This is how this stuff works. Oh, there's upgrade stuff. I had no idea. I didn't know you'd started at a 4 and ended up at a 1.
You mentioned the Jam Fund. That's like a youth development. Or what is the Jam Fund? Will you explain that to us?
Yeah. So the Jam Fund is based in East Hampton, Massachusetts. So it's JAM. It's Jeremy, Alec, and Mukunda. Jeremy Powers, Alec Donahue, and Mukunda Feldman. So Jeremy Powers, as we know, is the four-time national champion. Alec Donahue is the head associate coach for CycleSmart. Great racer in his own right, but coach to many, and my former coach as well. And McCunn Feldman is also a racer from the Valley, and had a lot of involvement back then. So it was not necessarily youth development, but a development program that stemmed off of the NCC, the Northampton Cycling Club's elite racing program. And yeah, it took, aspiring racers that had a goal of becoming professionals or reaching, a pretty high level with it. And, unlike a lot of development programs that start with, the necessity to start with youth, taking really young kids and putting them out there, they would take a 25-year-old like myself and see some potential there, and work not only in terms of their cycling, but it's a little bit of a life coaching group too. Just like all coaching is kind of you're 90% life coach and 10% cycling coach. It was still a really cool kind of community based program. And when I got involved in that, it was a really interesting fit for me because I had this guy from Martha's Vineyard, this Rodrigo, who was on that program, who I worked with, and was just like, man, you're the perfect candidate for this program. Like, you got to meet Al. You're just like, this is it, man. You got to get over there. And I ended up not meeting him through that connection. I had Lyme that summer, contracted Lyme that summer, and went through an antibiotic cycle and all that stuff. So I didn't end up actually racing that year in Massachusetts or in New England like I wanted to. That's when I drove across the country. I bought a Volvo, drove to Portland, did bike school, ended up doing a little bit of racing out there and having fun. But when I was in San Francisco afterwards, kind of did a little coastal tour. I met another person down there through racing, and she was on the MIT cycling team before and was like, man, you really got to meet this guy, Al. He was my coach, and I think you guys are getting along perfectly. He runs this Jam Fun program. I was like, oh, I'm actually aware of this. I know. So now I've got this East Coast and West Coast connection to this one person and me, and it turned into this okay, this is getting ridiculous. Yeah, we should probably meet. Let's at least feel this out. So I drove back across the country, ended up here, and I was living in one of the closed down campgrounds here in the fall in my wagon, and went riding with these guys, and just we took our road bikes and we went out, and then ended up hiking somewhere with them on our back, and I was like, this is my kind of riding, hell yeah. And eventually it was look, we don't have a spot for you. It's just, it's too late. We've already kind of started the season, and we just don't have the resources. But especially because you don't live here in the Valley, it's just problematic. But I'm happy to help you out, and happy to kind of get you just come to a race with me. Let's just see how it goes. So we went to this Cheshire race in Connecticut, a local race, and I show up there. I think my skin suit was broken. I had some safety pins in it, and had my own bikes, and show up with him, and there's all these kind of New England royalty there for me for cyclocross. I'm just freaking out, and we do the race. I am sitting in the group just kind of relaxed, having fun, and Al's like, what are you doing, man? We're all suffering. You should attack the group. I was like, oh yeah, okay, guess that makes sense. So I attacked, and I went, and Meyerson went with me, and he countered and kind of came with me, and we went up these railroad tie stairs up into the woods, and there was this cool single track twisty descent, pretty hard, tight kind of kid trail thing that goes through the woods, and we ripped through there, and it's a 5-second descent, and I just put so much time into him. By the time we came out of there, I probably had 10 or 15 seconds on him, and I just rolled it, and we go through, and there's this hill on the backside that's super steep. Everybody runs, so everybody kind of collects there and yells and kind of heckles or whatever. And I go through, probably 4 laps to go, and I'm off the front, and it's somber. These guys are oh, hey man, way to go, they're about to lap you, no big deal, you're fine. And then Meyerson comes through, everybody cheers, and they're oh my god, this is the greatest, Meyerson's winning the race. And they finally figured out, they're like, wait, no, that guy's winning. And they come back through the lap again, and they're like, oh my God, we don't know who you are. And I ended up winning the race. I ended up like rolling across on a flat, and still, I still won it. And, Adam came through and was just like, hey, good job. What the fuck? Who? I. And same thing, Al came across the line and just, was braking with one hand and had his shaking hand out in the other and put it out. We shook hands. He was like, welcome to the team. We'll figure it out. But I found that the cool thing about that program for me was that, I saw this niche where like, okay, if you don't necessarily have a spot, fully supported spot for me, I understand. I don't even live there, but let me make myself useful. They had a mechanic that was working for them, but it was just on the weekends. And, there's a lot of people in that program. There was probably 5 or 6 people at the time. And it's pretty ragtag, and you kind of show up to bring all your own equipment. So I found this like niche where I could continue teaching people what I like to do, which was work on bikes. I could maintain some bikes for them during the week, and they kind of gave me a job, and they paid me to do it. And then I get to race bikes and help out and be part of the team in a big way. So I kind of did that. I got UCI points that year for the first time, and ended up going to nationals actually as a mechanic. I ended up racing the elite race, but I also was a mechanic for and did pit for the masters and the women and everything else. So it's kind of it was a really fun time.
Now, what year was that?
Good question. 2013.
Okay.
I think.
Now, when was the first time that you went over?
Or 12.
Went over to Europe and raced for the national team.
So the first time I went over was was for Tabor, just after nationals in Austin.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was still racing. So it must have been 2012 when I started. 2014, I think, was in. I was on the Jam Fund still, and I kind of I made the criteria. I had started racing. I got to podiums and was actually like a top 10 contender. And I can't remember. I think I was 8th or something at nationals that year, just behind Dan Timmerman. And essentially, I got the call up and did some fundraising. And Powers, part of his deal with the program, with the development program, was like, okay, once you make it to a level, then I take care of you. Like, the Rafa Focus, the Aspire. Like that's kind of where that kicked on, where he was definitely a mentor to me. All of a sudden, instead of going on with the national team, I'm going to Europe with him, as a national team member. So to date, I actually have not gone over to Europe as a full national team supported member. I have only gone over as a, trade team supported national team member.
What kind of difference do you see in the European cyclocross community versus the U.S. cyclocross community?
It's more fractured for sure. European cyclocross is so professionalized compared to American cyclocross that it's almost not even the same thing. There aren't amateur races on the same day. If there are, it's kind of smaller races that have them. The fans that are there on race day tend not to be racers or as active racers as we get here. There's usually like a midweek or like on Saturday or whatever. There's the B races or the C races they have, and the local races, the masters races, etc. Usually not on the same course. They're usually somewhere else. Sometimes they're on the same courses, but a lot of those courses take up. It's like you take your hometown, you shut down the town. You only make it to where people can drive in if they have a sticker. People are bussed in, so you can't just kind of let the general public run around on these courses, because it's like through a 700-year-old church and through the school and through the main street and these cobble things, so it's not as simple as like putting in a park and letting people just kind of have their, let them do their thing. You don't have the time to have the level of production level of courses and allow all these other races to happen. So, there's a lot of amateur cyclocross races in Belgium or in Europe. They're not ever, in the same places. In fact, a lot of the amateur racers don't go to these races. They can watch them at home. They're probably just going to go ride on Saturday or Sunday instead of going to these races. It's mostly families and older people that are going to like bet and drink and eat sausages and hang out. It's going to the ball game.
It's a tailgate.
Yeah, it's a tailgating thing. I mean, like a lot of people don't even drive to the races. Each like supporter club or town will charter buses. And so you meet in your local town square or whatever, 60 or whatever of you get on this bus, or 10 buses, however many people you have in your club. And the buses drive you there. You get dropped off. You go to the beer tent. You get some tickets. You get hammered. You get back on the bus and you go home. So it's almost not even relatable in a lot of ways. I mean, you go to a race in the U.S. and I drive up in my car, rental car, or whatever, get taken to the venue, and I get to walk around and say like, "Hey, how's it going? Oh man, how's your race going? Great, cool." You get on the course. You got a couple of other people. You got a masters racer. You got a kids racer. You got a Cat 3 racer. Whatever. You get to watch a couple of other races. You hang out. You get some high fives. You get back in your tent, whatever, and you go home and you see the same people again. But in Europe, it's the crowds are kind of all in their own places. You kind of go in this back door, you show up, you get your tent. Yeah, there's crowds and there's people and there's fans and whatever, but you don't know them in the same way as you do, your friend from Wisconsin that is at the same race as you and like also raced and is giving you some advice or whatever. It's just not the same relationship.
As an athlete, do you find that you're more, or does it feel more supported, like with the U.S. model than say the European model?
On a personal level, yeah. I think people in the U.S. really get behind their racers. I mean, there's a real there's love for the underdog in the U.S. There's love for everybody that's participating, and some of that's changing in Europe. Actually, we're seeing a little bit of a difference where when I started racing there, you would go through a section and you could hear the crowds going, but the section you're in is dead silent because they're there to see one person. They have their support one person, and they're there to see that person, maybe two people. It's like one person from their hometown, whoever's the Belgian national champion, whoever's the world champion, and like that's it. And it wasn't the first season that I really had any fans that didn't really know me. And I had a couple of people. I think they were really surprised when people would. I actually had somebody. One of the first races I did came up and like printed a picture of me off of my Facebook page and made rider cards. It was like, "Will you sign these?" And I was like, "Oh my god! Like what the hell?" But and I think a lot of people and they started doing that, and like there were like 10 or 15 people that did that, and I was like, this is just super weird. And they were really surprised at how, probably taken aback by how like outgoing and how I just wanted to talk to them. I was like, I asked their name. It's not really the same kind of interactions you get. So in the U.S., it's a lot easier going. People come up and they're like, "Hey, this is my son, this is my daughter. They raced this morning. They thought you did really well. We actually don't know your name." Or, "Oh, we're big fans, and like, this is great. They also raced, and I also race," and we connect on that level. And although people can be fans here, they also have a really good connection through doing the sport themselves. And that's just a unique difference.
Interesting.
So in terms of then just the racing and the riding over there, what were some of the big takeaways when you started racing in Belgium and Europe?
I didn't know what I was doing. I got over there and I was just like, I mean, the first race I went to was Spa. It was the first year they had done Spa Francorchamps. And if you know Spa, if you've seen that race, it was a super prestige race. They only did it a couple of years. And it's on the Spa, F1 track. And it's in the Flemish Ardennes, in the Spa region where the water comes from, the sparkling water. It's super hilly, like it's in the kind of sub mountains and very wooded and just like the most brutal course I've ever seen. And like everyone was like, "Hey, if I do this, like if I go, should I do this race?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know, I've never seen it before. It's a new race, so yeah, whatever." It was the single scariest thing I've ever done in my life. Like I showed up and it was so huge. Like the start hill, I was like, everyone was spinning their tires going up the start hill on pavement. Like it was so big and so dumb. And like we're running downhill on this like slight downhill grass because it's so thick. It was just like getting my head kicked in. And then like we pulled out. I mean, it all started like as we rolled up. I had this mechanic that was working with me, and he rolled up and he was like the son-in-law of the guy I was staying with, and it was through a connection of through Jeremy, and who used to do USA Cycling program over there, and we show up, and first thing, like when you do these races, you sign up for a series, and through that series, you negotiate your start contracts and whatever, and they give you your parking passes for the series. So like you show up and you've got a sticker on your car already, and they wave you in, and they tell you what paddock to go to and whatever. But if you're like a day rate guy like me that's showing up and is just like, "Hey, I'm just here to race," I signed up. They're like, "Well, you need a parking pass." We're like, "Oh, well, I have to come in to get the parking pass." I'm like, "Well, that's not my problem. Like, I don't know how you're going to get in without a parking pass, So right away, it was just like, oh God, this is weird. I don't know what to do. And even my mechanic was just like, "Yeah, I'm trying to get this guy in." Like, they're like, "Well, what race is he doing? Or what are you guys doing here?" He's like, "Oh, I'm here with this elite rider." And the parking guy like looks over at me and he just shakes his head and he's like, no, not that guy. I don't know that guy. And I'm like, no, seriously. Like I'm here to race the elite race. And he's like, no, not a chance. Not a chance. And so finally I got it through, I win, I got my parking, and I passed 4 former world champions, the current world champion, all these people. My jaw is on the ground. I'm like, I have no idea what to do. I can't find the sign in, no idea where it's at. All of a sudden, everyone who was just like, "Oh, don't try to speak Dutch. We all know English." No one knows English all of a sudden. It's in like the French region, and they're definitely not trying. So I'm like, oh God, this is terrible. And the courses are just bananas. And so I just realized like right away that like we're not even doing the same sport to that degree of like, this is terrifying. This is huge. Everything about this is bigger and scarier. But oh my God, was it just exhilarating to do? I mean, I'm starting at the back of these races and just murdering myself to get pulled, with a lap to go. And it just was really eye opening. I mean, every race I went to was an experience that pushed me to learn, to change everything up, and to learn on my feet, and to go back and journal and think about like, oh God, I really fucked that up. Like, what do I got to do to actually like not get lapped? That was my first goal. Is like, how do I not get lapped? And you go to these different races. You find races that like fit the bill for what you think your skill sets are. And you're like, okay, cool. Well, I get to pre-ride this course, and this is a fun, like Hama was like a really fun, like BMX flowy course. And finally, it was just like, boom, top 25. I go from being like lapped to top 25. Like, okay, cool. You figure it out. And people start giving you more respect, and the racers start like going from like, I don't know who you are. There's not a chance you're going to ride in front of me, to like, okay, cool. I've seen you ride before. It's okay. Like, I'm not scared for you to be here. I'll move you when I'm ready, kind of thing. And that was another big shift. You go over there, and all of a sudden it's a very physical sport. There's no waiting. It's all full gas. You got to be in front of the other person. You got to jump them. You got to ride the technical stuff first. And so it's just, you're constantly fighting with people, where as in the US, you can sit in groups, and it's just not as aggressive. So yeah, I mean, from the first minute of being there, it was like, okay, this is a different sport, and this is going to be challenging.
How many seasons have you raced over there? 5, 6?
Yeah, I think I just rounded up my sixth world championship.
Okay.
Is that right? Fifth, sixth, one of those things. I started with Tabor. Let's see, I did Tabor, Zolder. What was after Zolder? Luxembourg, Beals, and then Denmark, and then where were we this year? We just got done in Switzerland. So yeah, just finished up my sixth world championships.
I would assume that through that many seasons that you would gain a lot of confidence just racing in Europe and did you find that, or did you find that every single race is kind of adjust, figure out the new things? There's new riding styles, new athletes. Do you approach it with a lot more confidence now than you did before?
Definitely, and that comes from knowing my strengths and my weaknesses. I mean, that's what you don't know when you go into a new environment like that. Like when you race domestically, or you race where you're used to racing. It's like doing your normal group ride and then going out and riding with, going to some other state and riding in another group ride there. You don't know how good you are compared to other people. The courses are courses. Like mud is mud. Hills are hills. Like you can adapt those things, but you don't know where you sit with other people when you show up. So kind of focusing in on the controllables and looking at where you're like, okay, I now know that taking away variables that are the other racers, taking away that kind of variable, how do I match up on this course? Okay, great. I have an idea of where I fit on this course. And then taking like your relative fitness and going like, okay, well, I had this kind of fitness before. This is where I was. This is how I felt, at this time last year, and I did top 15. Great, cool. Here's some new people. There's like 5 people that aren't here that I normally race against. You add all those things up to give yourself an idea of where you might expect to end up, and that gives you some confidence. Granted, different courses courses play out differently on different parts of the year, right? Like where you might have a race that's normally at the beginning of the season is now towards Worlds, and that race is now going to be faster because everyone is ramping up and training for Worlds. So depending on the level of the event, depending on where they are on the calendar, depending on the weather, you gotta give yourself a chance to get into your head and think like, okay, how can I best perform on this? What do I have to work on to do this? And what do I have to take advantage of in order to do this? And just doing that over the years has given me a lot of confidence to be able to know what to expect and know how to get myself out of a real bad situation.
Well, obviously, throughout the years, you've had a lot of success in this, and from 3-time national champion, correct?
Yeah, yep.
And then racing a lot in Europe. 2 Pan Am championships?
Yeah.
Okay. And so it seems to me like you went from throwing yourself into situations where you're like, I don't know, let's give it a shot, to now seeming like you're a little more calculated and a little more definitely a student of your sport. Do you still find that initial fun and excitement that you were, as you were explaining your first unsanctioned race in Florida, do you still get excited about racing?
I do. And but that isn't necessarily always the case, and it's not necessarily always going to be the case, because I love racing. I get really excited about it. I love riding my bike. I get really excited about that. But there's hard days and there's hard times. And in my career, I've had some really high highs, and I've had a really cool experience where typically when I jump into something, I have at least enough enthusiasm to make it fun, no matter how hard it is. However, with repetition, more variables pop up. The more times you do something, the more likely it is that something is going to happen. A mechanical, an injury, fatigue. Like the more you repeat, the more likely something is going to pop up, and that can be tough, and that has been tough for me. I've been, I have definitely not hidden the fact that I've had really hard times in my career. In fact, the last couple of years have been really hard. They've been really, really hard. 2 years ago I'd say 2 years ago was probably one of the hardest years of my entire life. Last year was not much easier. And sometimes it can be very difficult to find that joy that does keep me going. And, you got to find ways to do that. And that can be tough. That can be tough for sure.
Yeah.
So, well, we were just talking about, finding that fun in it. And do you ever find yourself having the opportunities throughout the season to kind of do a fun event that isn't really counting towards your season, but something you just kind of want to do?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, the cyclocross season can be very tough because that's my go time. Like I'm a pretty ADD person, and it takes a lot to kind of keep me on task with things. But once I get on task and once I figure out my workflow and how to do that, I become very focused, and it's very difficult for me to break that focus. So from year to year, I mean, especially once I started winning national championships, I mean, for me, it was like, how do I get into the top 10? How do I get into the top 5? How do I get onto the podium? How do I make the podium a regular thing? How do I win? Great. How do I make winning a regular thing? And then, how do I win on a single day event, when one thing is the main focus? And I became so good at that given the scenarios, given the players that we have in the domestic scene, and given the kind of level of ability and just repeatability that I've been able to really fine tune, it's very easy for me to get into that. Like, okay, Tuesday I do this, Wednesday I do this, Thursday I do this, Saturday and Sunday I don't fuck around. It's everything gets calculated. I mean, there was a point where, I was weighing myself in the morning and in the evening. I was food logging I probably food logged for 2 years straight. I didn't miss a single thing went into my mouth without it being logged. All of my training went into online training. I had a paper journal, did 3 days a week in the gym, have a sports psychologist, have, like a trainer, my coach. You do all of these, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, sleep tracking and all these things. And all of a sudden you do all that for a season, and you look up and you realize that you forgot to do anything fun. Like you forgot that people were waiting for you to hang out with them, or to do, whether it's your friends or your partner or your teammates or whatever, you're so focused. So I did get to a point where I was like, all I'm doing is like working really hard to do this. And I'm not really doing those things that I really enjoyed before. I'm not really getting to do those like fun events outside of the summer, which I was able to do. I was able to afford myself the fun events so that I had that time to really get in, August through February, just crush myself to get things done. And now I get to actually do a little bit more of that. Now I actually have more of that kind of scheduled in, and I'm giving myself more room to have fun and to do fun events like that.
Trevor was able to talk to, I don't know if you've ever heard the Elma Grand Prix. It's a big cyclocross race here in Michigan, and
yeah, I've heard of it.
Trevor talked to JB, who's the race director from it, and he actually had a few questions for you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, shoot.
This might be a big topic, but it kind of really interests Sheldon and I. We love gravel cycling, and Michigan has a great gravel scene right now. And of course, as you see like the progression of gravel, you see less and less road racing, especially here in Michigan. But JB was wondering if you are worried or if you see that gravel the upswing of gravel is kind of hurting the national cyclocross scene.
I don't think so. I don't think it is. I mean,
or helping.
And I also don't think that it's necessarily hurting the road scene. I think what's happening to the road scene is happening to the road scene, regardless of the popularity of gravel. And the same thing with cyclocross. I think the best part about those two things is that they're complementary. That cyclocross and gravel require, to a T, the same amount of, the same equipment. Cyclocross is a little more equipment intensive, and obviously different seasons with some overlap, but also give people the opportunity to kind of like carry over the joy they find in either sport. So I don't think that gravel's hurting cyclocross. I think what's happening to cyclocross is due, good or bad, is due to what happens in cyclocross. I don't think it has anything to do with gravel. Gravel is growing on its own. Gravel is growing because of the merits of gravel, because of how interested people are in it, how accessible it is to people, how many people don't have a gravel bike and all of a sudden have an opportunity to buy another bike, right? Like, there are a lot of pluses to getting involved into gravel. And I just don't think that there is something that cyclocross is doing that's driving people to gravel over it. And I don't think there's anything necessarily that road is doing to drive people to it, other than requiring a lot of time, being places, that you might not really care to be at. Like, I don't know, sometimes road races they're boring. Like, you go, you meet everybody in some school parking lot, you go hang out at the porta potties, and then you go get dropped, and then you go home. Like, it's not, that's just not appealing to people. I think the cool thing about cyclocross is that you can get lapped, and you can either keep going or you can just go hang out. Like, you still have the opportunity to do that. And the same thing with gravel. If you get dropped from whatever group you're in, or you don't want to go the same pace as other people, you're still just out on the course and you're just doing it. It's not a do or die thing. You don't have to be in the front to have fun. It's still beautiful places. There's still people to ride with. There's still food to eat. You get what you want out of it. Road is very much, it's win or lose in that. And I just don't think that appeals to a lot of people anymore.
I have another question from JB, but I want to wait on it. But another cyclocross friend of ours, Sarah Williams, she was kind of wondering how you, or if you have any advice for all of us, and how do we stay motivated, especially right now when we can't get out and ride group rides and do all these things.
Whew, that's a tough one. I mean, I struggle with that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is immune to dealing with motivational loss at this time. There's a lot of bigger picture things that are going on that require our bandwidth and our attention. I mean, there's only so much motivation to do things, and cycling is an extracurricular for almost everybody that does it. I mean, even currently, there's no races on the professional calendar. So really, there's nothing for us to train for. As a professional, there's nothing to train for. I can keep a relative fitness, but it's really difficult for me to get up and say, you know what I want to do? I want to go ride 4 hours in the rain. No, I don't want to do that at all. That is absolutely not what I want to do. What I've been doing lately is jumping on my touring bike and going to hang out. I put a blanket in the basket and I go find somewhere to jam out and sit and hang out in nature. So to answer the question, it's kind of time to figure out what about cycling motivates you. Not what about your racing motivates you, but what about cycling motivates you? Does getting on Strava and connecting with a few friends and talking to 5 or 6 people while you ride for as long as you want, 45 minutes, an hour. Like, if that drives you, go do that. If riding around the block with your partner or your kids, like if that's what drives you and that gets you on the bike, do that. Connect in ways that are going to reconnect you with what you actually care about in bikes. Because racing comes and goes. Fitness comes and goes. And you can always get fitness back. And I think that's what we're all worried about right now. It's like, oh, I had these plans. I had these goals, and now, like, I don't know what to do. What did you do before you had racing? Ride your bike. Go have fun. Or don't ride your bike. No one's gonna fault anybody for not riding their bike for a week or a couple of days or for the month. We all have families to take care of, and we all have big issues. We have our health to take care of. I mean, it's a really bad time to get in a bike crash right now. Across the world, and there are priorities there. So I think keep your family as a priority, and keep your mental health as a priority, and find some fun in whatever you're doing. Do something else. Do a little bit of jogging. Do some push-ups. Like, there's plenty to do if you don't have the motivation right now.
My motivation has always been the parking lot beers, and I can say that I honestly enjoy the most.
Yeah, solid.
So a question I have is, I know from your Instagram and other interviews you've given that you're a big fan of music. And I was wondering if you look at music as a separation, an escape from maybe some of the work that you put into your training or your cycling life? Or is it kind of all connected, that you use a little bit of the music to inspire and then you bring that to your cycling and kind of vice versa?
It's a little bit of everything. I mean, music for me has always been, it's always been a big draw. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I mean, just, I used to spend a lot of time just digging through my parents' record collection and playing the old Stones albums and the Allman Brothers and, the Bonnie Raitt and stuff like that. Just like, I've always had a really big connection with music. For a long time, I was homeschooled for a little while, and I was the youngest out of all my family, and I spent a lot of time alone in my kind of own world, in my imagination, and doing my own things, and music kept me company through a lot of that. And to a big extent, it also does that now. I've drawn connection from a lot of life experiences to the music that I have, and that's kind of what's connected me with the physical form, with records in general, or specifically records. Like, I don't buy a lot of new music, and there's a lot of things. There's a lot of people that say, or science says that you don't really form new taste kind of after a certain point. But
Sure.
For me, I go through the record store and I flip through bins and I'm like, oh man, this album connects me with this person in this time, good or bad, and it's the soundtrack to that period. And that's the way it's always been for me. I'm an album person. Like, I don't usually like playlists that much. I think through Spotify, I've kind of changed my tune a little bit on that, but I've always been a listen to an album over and over and over and over and over person, or listen to a catalog. I mean, I'll pull out whoever I'm listening to, I'll pull out, Cat Power or whatever, and I'll go through the catalog. I'll play, all 5 or 4 of her albums that I do have. And it always connects me to a mood and a time period in my life that I can always relive through that. It's interesting that, for a long time I would ride with headphones, and I think a lot of people ride with headphones because, you kind of get out and I don't know. I think a lot of people have a hard time being on the bike for a long time. People have a hard time being in their head for any amount of time.
Sure.
And eventually I found that I would get frustrated and rides would last forever to me. Like, an hour ride would just be forever. It would feel like a 3-hour ride, let alone doing a 3-hour ride with listening to music. It's just the repetition. And I found that I couldn't really be in both spaces at the same time. And getting rid of the music and just riding cued me in to everything that was going on around me. I started listening to my breath. I started listening to the birds. I started listening to the water. I started directing. I noticed a huge change in where I rode. From when I had headphones in, I would ride on bigger roads. I would ride on noisier roads. I would ride through towns, etc. When I didn't, I was pushed away from all that road noise, all that like congestion, and I would end up in more and more rural places. The less music I listened to, the more rural places I ended up in. And I realized that I connect with sound, whether it's music or whether it's just intrinsic sound, it's natural sound. I connect through that, and I can always remember and relate to those time periods, whether it was a ride or a date or a hike or a concert or whatever. Just sound in general, I connect with in a really big way.
Beautiful. Okay. I think we'll close with JB's last question because it's fantastic. But I do want to hear a little bit about, as much as you want to talk about. I mean, you just like released something pretty recently that you're starting to coach, and your career's changing a little bit. That it's going to look a little different than it has the last few years. Do you want to talk a little bit about that at all?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, things change, times change. Yep. Obviously, it's no lie that we're all of our lives are changing to some degree currently. And if they haven't, they will soon. This time that we're living in is forcing change on everyone. And I'm absolutely not immune to that. I did 5 years on Canada Cyclocross World, and this year they didn't have room to keep me. Just like we've all seen big downturns in race participation in actual races worldwide. There's less sponsorship dollars out there. There's less support for huge programs like Canada Cyclocross World. That doesn't necessarily end my involvement with Cannondale. And as of now, I am figuring out what my role in cyclocross looks like and what my career looks like, whether it's a full UCI team again, whether it's a Devo program, I'm not sure, but I'm going to continue to race. I have no intention of retiring at the moment. But if you were to ask me a month ago, okay, you don't have a team. What do you want to do? I would have said, I'm going to make a team and I'm going to keep racing as hard as I can. And I'm going to keep doing this. But the reality is that the landscape looks different. It's not as easy as like, well, I'll just put together another team. I got to read, I'm reading the room on this one, and it's our landscape isn't going to look the same when we pop back in. It already doesn't look the same before this happened, before this pandemic happened. You see the change from big programs to small grassroots teams, to people doing gravel, to doing privateer programs. The landscape in the U.S. looks different. It looks different all across the world, but really looks different in the U.S. And I think we've always struggled with our kind of identity as a racing community. And I want to prepare myself to kind of change with that, and to be hip to what's going on, and to really figure out how best the remainder of my career can both fit my needs, but also make an impact on the racing that I do. So part of that for me is coaching. I have had a tremendous experience with some of the best coaches and some of the best mentorship I could absolutely ever expect to have or ever want. I mean, just from day one, I've always been a mentorship person. Even in school, it just wasn't my thing. I always gravitated towards people that were doing things that had passion for them, and I found that I wanted to help those people, and I wanted their help, and I wanted to do what they were doing. And for me, my biggest relationships have been with mentors that have coached me, whether it been Al, whether it been Jeremy Powers, whether it been, Tim Johnson, or any of these other people that like I've just kind of latched onto. My last coach, Jim Miller, like, taught me just how to be self-sufficient and resilient, and to really trust myself, and to know what actually works. That knowing the numbers is one thing, and knowing what actually works in the real world and how to flow with that is just so important, and is so difficult to translate to people. And when I have all these people around me going like, hey, you have the gift to translate this for people. You have an opportunity here to take what you have learned, to take all those really hard situations that you've been in, that you've come out on top on, or just been through, and actually learn something from, to translate that to other people and to help them get through their hard times, and to get them to the point where they're both succeeding in their goals, but also finding happiness and finding fun in the sport they want to do. So my initial kind of rollout for this was to bring in a few athletes from now till the Worlds in Louisville, or not Louisville, but in Fayetteville in 2022, and just kind of, have it be this natural progression of athletes coming in, and me kind of still maintaining this bandwidth to race at the level that I wanted to. That looks different now. So I'm, I just found myself ready and willing to take on a full-time load and see where my racing kind of lies on the peripheral of that, and take it day by day. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, just seeing your career as an athlete and having all that success, and then just talking to you for the last hour or so, I mean, I have no doubt that you will do very well as a coach, as a mentor. It sounds like a perfect role for you, for sure.
I think so. I think it's honestly, when I look back at my life and my career, I can't even count how many mentors I've had in my life, and how many experiences that I've had through mentoring other people, whether I knew I was doing that or not, that made the most difference to me. You often think like, oh, well, I know what I'm doing in this scenario. Like, let me help this person, while we go through this together. And I found at some point that I wasn't given the opportunity to do that anymore. I was pretty isolated on the team that I was on, and I was very focused on results for myself. And this goes back to our earlier conversation, where I started to lose that fun and that drive to be there every day. And I was just starting to consider what I was doing. And what I really realized was I was missing the opportunity to help those people around me in a considerable way. And that just killed me. And so in order to kind of find that fun and push myself again, I just started reaching out more. And I just started it started with my teammates. It started with the younger teammates on my program, and with Katie Klaus, or with Curtis White, or the Devo program, Lane Mahar, and all these people. And then I get the opportunity to work with USA Cycling, and through there, I went from being a member that was never really part of that development program or that actual national team. Yeah, I raced under the national team colors, but I've never been afforded I never had the opportunity to be part of the team, to do two team things. And for that matter, there wasn't even that much of that. So to even do, and this last year, especially, where I saw this big hole of hey, we're in Europe and we have all of these athletes together. Why aren't we doing things together? Why aren't we working together? Why aren't we helping each other? Why aren't we mentoring one another? And I just jumped on that, through the coaches that were there, through Pete Weber, and it was just a really good opportunity to get more hands-on, to feel part of a community again. And I can't tell you how much that just drove me. how much I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter what my result is today, because I know I'm doing everything I can. I know what the expectations are of me, and I've already done something really great today. Like, it pushed me so much more. And then I got into the race and I wasn't exhausted anymore. I had just all this energy to push and be that athlete that I wanted to be again. And I thought for the first time in a long time that I had found a calling beyond just the result. And man, that was just really powerful for me.
That's great.
As you are, starting this new venture in your career, going more into or starting up the coaching, do you see yourself as you start to wind down at whatever point it's going to be racing? Do you think you're going to see yourself kind of venturing out and doing some of the more fun events that you've seen on people's schedules before that you haven't been able to necessarily afford in your racing career?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, that was that was my big goal this summer. I did BC bike race last year. And, I found myself riding with Kerry Werner and Mike Vandenham and, Jeff Kabush and all these people that I'm just like, we're racing our asses off. We're living in tents together and eating ice cream at night, drinking a beer. We're not racing for prize money. And we're like hooting and hollering, ripping down trails and having the most fun. And we're transferring and riding these ferries together. And it just was so cool. And it reminded me, why I really liked getting out and doing a lot of these races. So, I kind of look back at all my memories of my most fond memories of racing. And there's some big highs, like winning big titles and stuff. I mean, you'll never be able to replace those, but there's also those really good times where I was able to go just kill myself with my friends and go have, a pizza and a beer afterwards. And like, those are also irreplaceable. And so I really do see myself getting, back into that, especially once, we can all ride together. I think we're all going to be ready for a pizza and a beer and a bike ride.
You mentioned here in Michigan, we have an event. I don't know if you've heard of the Iceman Cometh Challenge. And
I have. I've heard of it.
When it's muddy, it's basically a 30-mile cyclocross course. It's usually the first week of November, but as you wind down, I would highly recommend putting that one on a calendar because it is a party.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely on my calendar. Actually, I was talking to a former winner, Troy Wells, about that race not too long ago, and it sounds like so much fun. I think I even called him. He's actually my tax person now, and I think we called each other, and half of our conversation was about bike riding. It's always about bike riding, and then the other half is like the dirty taxes, right? And so I think one I was just like, dude, do I need to do Iceman? Like, it looks awesome. And he's like, absolutely.
It is an absolute riot of a race. Like, no matter like how the day goes, it's tons of beer afterwards. The atmosphere in the forest afterwards is just this huge party. It's
That's so cool.
Definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'm into it. I mean, I did Vermont Overland this last year, and I hadn't done it since the inaugural one. Probably, God, I was on Stella's Pro Cycling then, so maybe it was 2015 or something. And I ride gravel roads every day, and I ride trails every day on my road bike and my gravel bike, or whatever, my cross bike, and there's nothing particular about gravel racing that necessarily excites me over one racing or another. It all looks fun to me. But doing Vermont Overland, having to be, pretty close and just having so many friends there and getting out there, I actually had pretty big expectations for myself for the race itself. And I got dropped really quick. It just was a terrible day for me. Like everything went wrong. And I was just sulking, and I was like riding, and I was just like, oh, this is so dumb. What am I doing? And then I just started slowly picking up my friends, And all of a sudden I'm riding with all my friends. We're riding gravel roads, and 20 minutes later we're like skidding and yelling at each other and having fun. And I'm like, oh yeah, you idiot, you get caught up on all this dumb stuff. Like, it doesn't matter if you get dropped, like, just go have fun. Like, me and Tim Johnson shredding some trails and having beers afterwards. That's what I call fun.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This was great. We really appreciate your time. I do want to close with this question from JB.
Yeah, shoot.
So we established that you grew up in Florida. You've spent a lot of time in Belgium. He was wondering. Let me pull it up because I want to get it all right. But he said, "What's the most Belgian thing about Florida?" And conversely, what's the most Florida thing about Belgium?
Oh God. It's kind of funny that he asked that, because I have drawn a lot of comparisons to the two places. I'm from Northwest Florida, so it's like, it's pretty different. Like, a lot of people have been to Florida. They've been to South Florida. Few people have been to Central Florida. Very few people have been to the Panhandle, and even less people have, outside of the military, have been to, Northwest Florida. And it's very much like, it's farm fields and then like the beach. I don't know. Like, they're called the Redneck Riviera. I mean, it's very different. So in a lot of ways, you just draw these comparisons, like where I'm riding around in these like field roads, it's like relatively flat, kind of rolling, windy, pine trees and like kind of manicured forest and field. And sometimes I could just close my eyes and open them, and I'm just back in Belgium, or I'm in the Netherlands, or that part of France, whatever. And like, sometimes I'm in Florida. I can hardly tell at times. Outside of the red clay, it's really difficult. The people are similar in a lot of ways too. It's a working class area. In Pensacola, it's a lot of military. I mean, Flanders is a working class part of the country. I mean, it, was just a really kind of put down half of the country, where you had you had Wallonia, you had Brussels, and the French speaking kind of ruling class that just really put down the farmers and the factory workers that lived in Flanders. It's a lot like that in Pensacola, where like you just have this blue collar working environment. There's farmers, there's forest industry workers, there's paper mill workers, there's the military, and then you just have this like kind of big class divide. Florida is a lot more racially diverse, that's for sure. It's hotter, that is for sure. There's actually probably more inches of rain in Florida than there is in Belgium. It just all doesn't come down at once. In Belgium, it just kind of drizzles out over 6 months of the year. And I definitely would say the party cultures between the two are redneck chic, if you will. They definitely get wild in their own ways. They definitely do a lot of cheap beer drinking. And are no strangers to tailgating.
I love it.
That's great.
Yeah, I feel right at home in either place. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Stephen. This was great. We really appreciate it, and we wish you all the success with whatever this season turns into, and then from then on.
If you ever come up to Iceman, let us know.
I will. I know. I certainly will. It's definitely sure. It's literally written down on my list of events that I want to do. So I look forward to it. I really thank you guys for reaching out and making this happen. It was really fun.
The Dirty Chain Podcast is a Michigan Midpack media production in partnership with KOM Cycling, the source for your bike accessories and necessities.
Connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Dirty Chain Podcast. Email dirtychainpodcast@gmail.com or call our hotline 616-522-2641.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review on whatever platform you use to listen.
Audio editing and original music by Trevor Gibney.
Sheldon Little handles the social media, graphic design, and of course, bad decisions. Don't forget to call in for your chance to win a KOM trainer wheel block.
Thank you to Stephen Hyde for setting time aside to sit down and talk with us and the Midpack.
And of course, thank you all for listening to the Dirty Chain Podcast.
Keep your chain clean.
Get your chain dirty.
We'll see you in the Midpack. Boom. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Perfect.